Hello, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to take another look at the indoor hyacinth. I've already done a care video for this plant, which you can find in the description below. But sometimes they can still be a little bit tricky. We're talking weak stems, falling over, sometimes no flowers, rotting, and also what do you do with them once they've actually finished blooming? So in today's video, what we're going to do is go through common problems as well as best practice for what you should be doing with them after they have finished flowering. Does your hyacinth look like this currently? Lanky growth, tall leaves? If so, it is the first problem on my list, which is lanky growth. Now, it's caused by one of two reasons. Number one, either the light level is too low, so you're growing it in a very, very low light location, the plant is stretching. Okay, it's less likely to be the problem because most indoor settings aren't that dark for these plants, but it's something to bear in mind if you've chosen a really dark location for it. The second reason, which is usually the most common for these plants, is that the temperature is too warm. Okay, so in their natural habitat, they grow outdoors, and they're growing in sort of springtime when it's still quite chilly outside, and indoors it's not chilly. We like it warm, and it's usually too hot for these plants. Indoors, the maximum sort of temperature you're going to be looking for is around 15 degrees Celsius, which is this much Fahrenheit. If you go above that, it's going to cause it to bolt, basically, to have rapid, stretchy growth, which is what's happening here. So it's to do with the temperature. If there is a big problem for you, then you need to find a place in your home that is cooler. If you can live with it, then it's not really an issue, but that's why it happens. The second issue connects with the first. If you're not a fan of the flowering stems hanging over, they can flop, they can even touch the ground, they can come right down. Then it's because of the temperature, which we've just discussed. But if it's an issue for you, what you'll need to do is tie them together, which is what I've done with mine. So there's a little bit of string, you just tie them together. It's very common to do that. It keeps them upright and they support each other, especially if there's more than one in the same container. If you only have one hyacinth bulb, or maybe two, something like that, and it's still unstable, you can use chopsticks or some kind of stick to go in here to give it some support and keep it upright. Let's now look at actual flowering problems. So the first one would be there's no flowers at all. So the flower spike stem comes out of the middle of the plant, and most often when you buy them, you can see them coming up. If they don't make it all the way out, or they go brown, or some of the buds go brown and they drop off, or the whole lot doesn't open, the most likely reason that's happened is due to underwatering. The plants like to be moist from pretty much all the time. If it dries out too much, the buds are the first thing to fail. The problem you might come across is the buds going rotten. Okay, now if that's happening, it's the reverse. Most likely what's happened here is overwatering and poor air circulation mixed in. So with not much circulation of air and too much water, fungus and rot are very common. So that's most likely why that's happened. And the third thing might be that there's not much smell, or the smell doesn't last for very long. You'll prolong the smell and the scent for a lot longer if you place it into a cool room. If the temperature's too warm, everything about the plant goes into overdrive. The growth, the scent gets released much, much faster. And then once it's done, the plant's finished. So you'll prolong the scent experience if you keep the temperatures a little bit cooler. The last flowering thing to talk about is more of a unusual scenario, but it does happen. I've been asked questions before, and it happens on my plants. I mean, luckily, or maybe not, depending on how you want to look at it, it's happening this year on this plant. So we have mutant flower buds where the color is completely different to the rest of them. And in this particular case, this is like a purple, lilac color, and the buds, some of them are coming out completely white. Why is that happening? It could be any number of different reasons, but the most likely reason and the most common cause of this is just because of the pigmentation of the plant. It's just gone a little bit wrong. Okay, they should all be nice blue sort of colors, but it's not. It's come out white. There's just no pigment, which is unusual, but it does happen. So it doesn't mean you have a variegated or a special hyacinth. Unfortunately, it's just typical. And if you are able to keep the plant until the following year, if it flowers again, it most likely will disappear completely. It's just a one-off. There's nothing to be alarmed about. You haven't done anything wrong. It's just a natural quirk of the plant. Something to enjoy, something a bit different. Okay, let's now talk about browning or yellowing leaves. In the early stages of having these plants indoors, you probably won't come across that. If you are experiencing that, then it's going to be a watering issue. Either too much water if they're going yellow, typically, or if there's not enough water, sort of brown, especially starting towards the tops. It's not a common experience that you're going to come across in the early stages, especially when it's still flowering. However, once the plant is done flowering, which is going to transition us into the next part of the video, there is a good reason that's happening and why it's not something to be concerned about, and actually something you want to see. Okay, so we've done a little swap. This is the plant from my care video, which I mentioned right at the start of this video, which I did a few weeks ago. Here it is now. The flowers have finished and they've gone over. And we now have flowers which are, the stems are fading, they're going yellow. It's finished indoors. There's no more smell, there's nothing. And these are going to start dropping off shortly. The plant has finished and its time indoors is limited. And at this point, most people don't want to keep it around because it has now become a little bit boring. So what do people do? A lot of people will just now throw them away. I do not recommend that. I'm telling you no, and I'm not going to talk about that any further in this video. It's a waste, an absolute waste to do that. So what I would recommend you do is basically wait until this happens. Okay, so this will be a couple of weeks after the flowers have gone over and it's starting to all go brown. Flowering stems will start to go yellow. Don't do this before, but once you start to see yellow tinge on them and they starting to become very limp, basically, you can cut them off, cut the flower stems off. So all you'll be left with is the green growth. And then just leave it. Move the plant to a bright location, ideally now with some full sun. That's really ideal for them at this point because they're going to now start to gather energy ready for flowering next year. What you want to do is give them light to do that. Keep them well watered as well. They need water, they need light, and a little bit of fertilizer as well at this point. Those are all things that they're looking for. So if you can provide that, you'll start to allow them to build their energy. Don't cut the leaves off at this point. Don't do anything about that. Just leave them as they are. Don't just keep them out of the way. Some people don't like to see them, and that's completely understandable. So find somewhere in your home which is bright, where they're out of sight, basically. But they can still continue to build their energy in their bulbs. What will happen then, after they start to get to a point where the plant's almost ready, you'll start to notice some of the leaves going yellow. They will start to generally look not great. They might be starting to bolt a little bit, get really tall, they might start to fall over. At this point, it's most likely warm enough outside to think about transitioning them outdoors. So if that's the case, what you can do is this. Literally take them outside, dig a hole where you want to plant them, where you want them to flower in the following years, and plant them. That's it. Just like you would normally. Just plant them into the ground. It's really, really simple. That's probably the easiest way to deal with it and be done with it. Bury them over, cover them over. The bulbs do need to be buried underneath the ground, so do dig a little bit of a hole. They need to be a couple of inches down. The leaves will start to fade and they will just disappear. And you won't know where they are until the following spring when they flower again. That's the first approach, which I think is the easiest. The second option is for people who don't want to plant them right now. There could be so many reasons for that. You don't know your garden design scheme for the following year. You're not sure where you want to put them. You don't have any space for them. You don't think you want to keep them, but you want to give them to someone else. Any number of reasons, okay? So if that's the case, just leave them like this. You can basically put them outside. So take the container, pop them outside, and just do the same thing again. Keep them watered, put them in a bright location, and give them a little bit of fertilizer. In the next couple of months, the leaves will wither, they will go yellow, and they will basically fall over and disappear. And at that point, you can essentially remove the bulbs from the compost, the potting mix, clean them up, and you should just have literally bulbs as though you were in a store, in a garden centre, buying them loose, ready for planting. That's what you should be end up with. But the bulbs are ready to go. They just need their period of rest at this point. So what you want to do then is find a cool, dry location, a shed, an outbuilding, something like that. Tuck them away for a few months, and then plant them in the ground when you're ready. The only thing you have to remember is they need to be in the ground roughly towards the end of autumn at the very latest. Don't leave it later than that. Get them in the ground, get them in the place where you want them to flower the following year by that point, and then it's absolutely fine. And you have some wonderful, wonderful plants to look forward to in the spring. You might have a question in terms of why can't I just reforce the same bulbs for the following end of the year? You could try it, absolutely. And if you want to give that a go, you'll need to follow the second option, which I've just outlined. So that will mean turning them back into bulbs rather than planting them in the garden outdoors. Once they've turned into bulbs, you would bring them in somewhere. It needs to be later on in the year as well. So you bring them back in and you put them somewhere cool, ideally somewhere like the fridge. It needs to be below 10 degrees Celsius, basically, and dark for pretty much all the time. And you need to do that for around 10 weeks. So it needs to be cold. If it's too warm, it won't work. They need a period of chilling, a period of cold period, for them to sort of be tricked into thinking that they're going through winter, basically. then you'd bring them back out and growth should sprout and you should be able to start bringing them back. However, the reason I don't necessarily recommend that is because bulbs forced in consecutive years tend to have really poor displays. The flower display just isn't usually very good, and it's not really worth the effort to take up fridge space and things to do this. The best thing to do is usually to buy brand new bulbs if you want indoor hyacinths. That's usually the simplest way to do it. They tend to be quite cheap, they're not usually expensive, but you could absolutely try and force them yourself, but the results are likely to vary. So it's up to you. So that's it for this video. I think I've covered everything that is common problems and what to do with them after they finish flowering. It's just left for me to say I really appreciate you watching my video today. Thank you for sticking around to the end, and I hope to see you in the next one.